Oh, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this very, very sunny day in London. And it's been raining a lot, so it's very nice to have some sun today. I hope you're joining us from a sunny country too. Feel free to turn on your camera and say hello to us, give us a wave, and also feel free, because it's really nice for us to see you really, and to see a bit of an audience for me and Osita. And feel free to also say something in the chat, introduce yourself or say hello. It's very much an informal conversation today, and we're going to talk about inclusive recruitment. First, shortly introduce the Big Fish Academy. Who are we? We got started 2 years ago, where both my partner and myself, who founded Big Fish Academy, were working in diversity and inclusion. And increasingly, where we're meeting people who were very passionate about diversity and inclusion, but weren't quite sure how to get there. And we could see them do things that weren't, having worked in this area for many, many years, we could see them do things that weren't very effective, starting in the places where we started and knew it wouldn't work. And we were really keen to help those people. Now you can go online and find all that information. You can read books and find all that information. What we try and do at the Big Fish Academy is bring it all together in one place for you. Short training programs, short blogs, and calls like this, or expert support for you personally when you're driving diversity and inclusion. And today I've got with me Osita Madu. And I'm really glad to have him because he works for HS2. He's been working there for many years, a large infrastructure project here in the UK. And he has won multiple awards on with his inclusive recruitment programs. And Osita, do you want to introduce yourself a bit more there first?
Yes, thanks, Inga. As Inga has just said, I've been at HS2 now in a role as Senior Equality Diversity Manager, looking after the supply chain for coming up to 5 years this June. So by HS2 standards, that's long term. And ultimately, although we call it HS2's High Speed 2, as a program is really to design and build the railway. And in doing that, the responsibility is how we actually engage and procure by getting suppliers on board who will actually do lots of that design and build. And one of the things that you have to do is have an aligned culture between what HS2 as an infrastructure project wants and what those suppliers who are mainly in the private sector, because they will all come with their various different cultures, so that you align the cultures together and create one big HS2 family as we speak. So the journey to doing that, and as I'll explain throughout this, has been quite a challenge, but also rewarding at the same time.
Oh, well, fabulous. Thank you. Would love to hear from everyone on the call before we start with the questions, where you are with regards to inclusive recruitment. So I've got a short poll for you. You should be able to see that now. And if you can't see the poll, then I will read it to you and you can give your answers in the chat. So where are you with regards to inclusive recruitment? 1, I'm making plans, but I haven't started yet. 2, I have implemented some actions, but I'm not seeing any results yet. 3, we're doing quite well. We're sourcing diverse candidates, but actually, yeah, somehow they're not getting the jobs. We're not selecting them. Or 4, we've implemented many actions and are looking to improve and looking for more ideas from some of the best, who of course we have on the call today. So let us know in the chat where you are, or just fill out the poll. Last 10 seconds, we've got almost everyone voting now. 3, 2, 1, cast your votes. Here we go. So let me share the results. Oh, we've got a wide variety of people on the call. Can you see the results, everyone? Yep, I see some people not. We've got about 1/3 of you who are just starting, 1/3 of you who have started but don't see the results yet. Couple where selection is an issue, and then about 1/3 who are looking to improve. So hopefully we can bring something to all of you today. And we'll keep that in mind with those questions. So Osita, sorry, I'm using your short name, right? But for our official recording, we should say Osita. First, a question for you then. Can you say a bit, where did it start for HS2? Why was it so important to be inclusive in recruitment for HS2?
It was important for a number of reasons. One is that we want to do things differently within the sector. So, and that's not to say within rail engineering and construction, as part of this infrastructure program, that there weren't companies who were already doing things differently around inclusive recruitment. But certainly it's not part of common practice. There were pockets, isolated pockets, but there wasn't a well-regarded and well known method of recruitment that was inclusive. So we wanted to really show that as an example, and using that as an example, start to share that across the sector.
And where did that desire come from? Is that because you're such an innovative project altogether?
I think that came from the basis that when you start an infrastructure program, you almost got a clean slate. It's not like a mature organization that has cultures, policies, and things already embedded. In many cases, people want to protect the way they work and their culture. So this was an opportunity, you know, at the start when HS2, coming up to 10 years now, when they said, actually, we're going to build this infrastructure program, but the cultural change and the things we want to implement, we want to do that differently. One of the first places we looked at was actually at the London Olympics, 2012 Olympics, to see some great examples of how they did diverse supplier there and how they actually work with local communities and how diversity was core to having a successful Olympics. And so you learn from that and you want to build on that. So once we joined and started the EDI journey around about 2015, it was a case of saying, what do we want to do differently as part of this? So the inspiration already came from the Olympics.
Yeah, and then what groups did you focus on? Was that initially just gender, or did you go wider from the start?
We wanted to make sure we had strategic focus. So I think really it's about drawing up a strategic plan around equality, diversity, and inclusion. And that strategy is supported by a plan, and it's a developmental plan over a 5-year period. And within that, we clearly wanted to identify of those protected characteristics, one that was strategically more important for us because we can gather evidence, we can gather the data around them. And so we know traditionally across many organizations, gender is very topical, ethnicity or race is very topical, and disability is also very topical, as is LGBT. But we know because of the sensitive nature of collecting information, there's very little in terms of rich data coming from LGBT workforce. So the richest data and evidence and strongest base came from the 3 of those protected characteristics around disability, ethnicity, and gender. Mm-hmm. And so at a strategic level, we focused on that. However, we did still monitor and look at the other protected characteristics, but as a way of indexing where we're at and measuring how successful we were, it was on those 3 areas.
So your criterion was it's topical, and your criteria was it needs to be measurable. And when you say topical, was that topical for staff, topical in society? Was it topical for the senior management?
It's not either of those things. It's just topical because it's the normal thing you do in diversity. So yeah, we know that there's lots of data on comparators. There's lots of benchmark around gender. There's lots of benchmark around ethnicity, and you get richer data. That's the basis of it.
Oh, that's really good. And then, because a lot of people ask me, where do we start? So that would give them some real insight. Another thing people really want to know is, how do I get people on board from this? Because we have a lot of people on the call who are, for instance, in HR, or who are hiring managers and not actually responsible for the recruitment policies. So they need to sort of drive this within their organization, get it on the agenda. And I know this is something you also do, Osita, where it comes to your suppliers, right, to help them understand that this is important. So what arguments do you use, or how do you go about convincing people that can't quite see that diversity is important for them? You know, the sort of people that say, and I know this is someone in the CIA said this, a few years before 9/11, he said, look, we can either be super duper or we can be diverse.
Yeah.
So he chose to be super
interesting.
duper. Yeah.
Interesting quote. I guess for us, there wasn't a hard sell about diversity per se. And the reason is that, like I mentioned, the business case of why it worked was already there at the start of the program. We'd learned lessons from seeing the London Olympics. We know what organizations were doing. So it wasn't a case of having to make, why do we need to do equality, diversity, and inclusion? But for those who are at the start of the journey and perhaps haven't compared themselves or looked for evidence of organizations that are doing well in equality, diversity, and inclusion, I guess the starting point is, what do you want to change and where do you want to make a difference? In other words, if you've got a culture that's delivering the same thing and there is problem, either around your retention and you're losing particular groups of people, either women or people from ethnic minorities, or you're getting a culture that's quite grievance-based, because often that's an indication that there is a problem. You know, there's grievances flying around everywhere and there's people leaving the organization. If you're having problem in that respect, then you perhaps need to look at what groups are leaving and why. And if your satisfaction from your staff survey is telling you that there are a group of staff that are least satisfied with the way they've been treated and their experience at work, then you need to look at that. So again, it will be up to organizations to indicate or to look at what the indicators are as to where they then start to address diversity. But I think the case for us doesn't just start from looking at where we are recruiting people or attracting people that are more diverse, because I often think the conversation goes there straight away. Organizations say, we need to be more diverse, but yeah, but why? What would it do for you? Some people think doing that by itself will actually change the culture of the organization. So the business case needs to be based on the evidence you have and the data you have that tells you about your organization and the people that work for you. And where there is a blockers, problems, or barriers, that's when you need to then start to address and look at your diversity.
And I really like what you're saying there, that it isn't doing diversity for diversity's sake, but actually you need to ask, so what is this going to bring us, right? Why do we want these diverse people, or what problem are we trying to solve? And then quantify that if there is a problem that needs solving.
Yeah.
But then what do you say to those people that do say, okay, but we want to have the best people, we don't want to compromise. So if we're going to go for diversity, surely that's, you know, positive discrimination. How do you speak to those people, Osita?
Yeah, you can have the best people, and some organizations, surprisingly, that are not as diverse have the best people. The problem is retaining the best people, because if they leave, and in a changing world, depending on the nature of your business, whether you're supplying goods, you're providing a service, is whether you're actually speaking to your audience in the right way, and that you're representing the various diverse suppliers, partners, customer base that you have. And if you're not doing that, then you need to change, because the message and the communication, and particularly the employee value proposition that you're saying as an organization, are things that will either turn people off because they don't see themselves reflected in the organization, or will attract them because they do see themselves reflected in the organization. So I would say to organizations who are saying, actually, the best thing to do is to focus on what would make a difference for you, so that you're in a position to demonstrate that by being diverse, you're actually going to be more productive. You're going to be more attractive to other people joining the organization. That actually it impacts on your bottom line, as the case is for the supplier diversity. You know, the more diverse businesses you're dealing with, who are in many cases innovative, the more likely you are to address the needs you have. And you can also demonstrate that you're actually having a larger spend with some of the minority-owned businesses. Because we know typically what happens is that there is a closed supply chain, i.e. the suppliers that have worked well with other subcontractors will always go out to do business with them because they've done businesses before. And it's more difficult to open up that and actually attract a different supplier base.
Oh, yeah. So that's a really good argument as well, right? It will bring
Yeah.
in really new people into the industry. If there are any questions at this point, throw them at us, right? Use the chat to ask your questions so I can see them coming in. And meanwhile, we now want to know, okay, so we know it's important to recruit for diversity, but how do you do it? And just wanted to ask you that in a poll, and I'll read that poll if you can't see it, and feel free to then let us know in the chat what your answer is. What approaches you have already been using for selecting a wider range of candidates? Have you tried blind CVs, number 1? Have you tried number 2, balanced shortlists? Have you tried number 3, structured interviews? Number 4, balanced panels? Number 5, training hiring managers in bias? Or anything else? Let us know in the chat, right? And we'll talk about some of those in a minute. And if you're thinking, what can I do to select for diversity? Here is a list of some of the things that that have actually worked for people, right? Blind CVs, meaning, we're going to talk about that, so I won't go in. Balanced shortlists, meaning to make sure there is a particular number of women or people from ethnic minorities on your shortlist. Structured interviews, making sure you're asking the same questions to everyone. Balanced panels, making sure you have a panel that has a diverse range of people on it, or at least people meet people that don't look like your usual suspects when they come for the interview process. And obviously training your hiring managers in bias. So let me share the results of that. Really interesting. So we see all these things have been used by some of you. There are a minimum of 9 people who have used some of this. So that's really, really interesting. So let us know also in the chat if you'd like to add anything to what Osita is saying, or what results you've achieved, because we've got a really well-experienced group of people here all together then.
Mm-hmm.
A question has come in, Osita. You mentioned making a business case for diversity and inclusion, specifically tackling issues such as turnover and a grievance culture. How do you determine, though, that these issues are linked to a lack of equality, diversity, and inclusion, or an issue with your culture?
This is a good question, actually. So that would be quite straightforward. I mean, if you're getting a high proportion, disproportionately, you know that women in your organization are dissatisfied, or there's a higher grievance been raised by them, or that you're getting it from particular groups that are disabled, or those from ethnic minority, LGBT, etc. And you will need to have staff survey that reflects those groups. I think sometimes staff surveys don't go far enough in asking the question. So sometimes it looks at sort of directorates, teams, or organization in that sort of groupings, rather than try to isolate actually how many of the people responding as staff fall into these protected characteristics. And you would quickly build up a picture over time, not as a one-off survey, but if you're having it year on year, you'll quickly build up a picture of where the sort of pinch points are, or what groups are most dissatisfied. Equally, you can build that up by those on the different spectrums in terms of pay grade or organizational grade structure. And certainly one of the things we found is that when we have done staff survey, we've done this as a poll survey initially, there's been a concentration of women in particular directorates who are least satisfied with their opportunities for advancement in the organization, because they felt that the developmental opportunities wasn't open to them, or that they didn't see that sort of incremental and expected progression. So you've got to start to address these things. So my starting point and my suggestion really is to really critically analyze the data you're getting from your staff survey.
Oh, great. Now going to methods then, what, and one more was mentioned actually on top of the ones that I mentioned in the poll, which was mentioned in the chat, which was actually to change job descriptions to use more inclusive language.
Yeah.
So which one of those has proven most effective for you, Osita, at HS2?
I think they're all equally valuable. I guess it depends what role you're recruiting for. So certainly they're part and parcel of the process of recruitment. So I wouldn't isolate one. So if you're in a position to look at your attraction and saying, who are we attracting to the organization? You've got to look at the legacy by which you recruit. How are you doing recruitment in the same way you've always done it? Are there the preferred agencies on your supplier list that you've always used? How often do you review them? Are they still fit for purpose? Because we know the recruitment market is very competitive. So if you're looking at your executive search firms, are they the same ones you've been using for the last 10, 15 years? Have you reviewed them? And you review them with a view that they are relevant, but also that they can provide you with diverse shortlists. So when they look for candidates and look for exec appointments, they're not usually looking in the same pool as the person they know or contacts they have, but they're actually challenging themselves and said, actually, we're looking at somewhere different. So I think you need to be really broad in looking at your attraction and engage with your suppliers. You know, those agencies that supply you staff, you need to be very clear what you want from them. And also you should need to involve them in the training. So if you're doing anything around your unconscious bias training, around recruitment, inclusive recruitment, they should be there. Whoever the account manager is for those agencies, they need to be part of your training. The other thing you need to do is start to really critically look at the job adverts you put out. What is the language you're using? Are they subjective languages? Do they attract the right people? Do they position your organization in the right way that people see your organization as diverse and an organization they would like to work for? And that feeds into obviously your employee value proposition that you make in your job adverts. What does your website communicate about your organization? Is it sending the right language? Does it show that you're a diverse organization that welcomes different people of different backgrounds? And most critically, at the point then when you send out a job description, you also need to be very clear in terms of the skills, experience, and knowledge, that those are not subjective and that you've included things that are not measurable. You know, people will often say strong team working ability or 5 years experience. You know, how would you measure strong, for example? It's an arbitrary term that you can't actually really measure. So you've got to really look at objective things that you can measure, and competencies are the best way to do it. Set out clear, measurable competencies that are objective. And in that way, you're then not having the sort of barriers around subjective language or languages that actually discriminate. And then you can start to look at what you do as part of the process within your recruitment. And we'll talk about as we go on. But I think that's a starting point from the position of attraction.
That's really, really helpful. You can listen to the recording, right? If you didn't get all of that, you will get the recording afterwards. There is a question about this as well, OC, that says, but what about senior positions? We're working in tech and engineering, and it's really tough to get recruiters to put a diverse list forward for those senior positions because these people just don't seem to exist. So what is your experience with that, with the more senior roles?
Senior roles are a challenge in many respects because you're then working from a smaller pool of people that you want to appoint to senior positions. But we also know another thing that happens at senior level, and sometimes we're not honest in the conversations that we have, because we know in many exec roles that people are headhunted. So the formal process of applying for a role and going through selection, etc., doesn't often apply to the same extent for exec roles. So if there's going to be an opportunity for direct appointment, an existing exec member will make the decision and talk to either HR and say, look, you know, we need to appoint somebody, finance director for the sake of argument. And they will look at agencies, a headhunting agency will look at a pool of who's available in the market. But depending on the sector you're working, if it's IT, construction, or etc., they would ideally want somebody at exec role that reflects that sector or somebody who they know within that sector. So it's not untypical that you may find in our sector within rail that some of the directors will come from similar infrastructure projects or come from Crossrail, Network Rail, or come from somewhere else. So the tendency is that you're fishing from the same pool. And ultimately, it's about broadening that out. And I think actually there are really competent exec level who qualify for this role, but we're just not looking there. So I think sometimes the reason given is the people are not there. But the reality is they are there, they're just not been found, and you're looking in the wrong places, because you look in the places you've always looked, and you're going to find the same people you always found. And then if that doesn't work, you then go through the network and ask people, would you recommend somebody who can then be directly appointed? So some of those informal practices of recommending somebody for exec roles, it doesn't give an open opportunity for other people to apply, because somebody could be spoken to over coffee and be appointed directly into a position. And we know lots of that goes on at that senior level. So the reality is, if you really want to attract and recruit somebody at the more senior level who's from a diverse background, you should start to really look at the variety of platforms or agencies you use and look where you don't normally look. And that's the challenge.
So you've widened your lens, right? And you've got a really attractive proposition. Your website looks great and diverse. Then I know, Osita, you've done a lot as well with the way you select people with blind auditioning, for instance. I'd love to hear a bit
Yes.
about how you've done that.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Do you want me to talk about blind auditioning just generally, or is there a question?
Yeah, what you did
that?
and how you applied that to it, because there is some questions as well, how you apply those things at senior level. So if you can address that there as well.
So blind auditioning is different to what's been, I mean, 40% of people on the last poll you mentioned, you took there, had used blind CVs. Now, blind auditioning is more comprehensive. You know, blind CV would look at, obviously, any indicators that rule people out from the application process. So names, usually if it's foreign sounding names, or, you know, gender specific, date of birth, any of those sort of indicators that would normally discriminate against them, you remove from the CV. With the blind auditioning, it starts with the CV, but also includes all the other processes around selection, interview, assessments, etc. So it's a very comprehensive way of ensuring that actually you provide the best means for those candidates to come through and be employed. And one of the areas we actually piloted the blind auditioning was through our apprenticeship program. Because our apprenticeship program has probably the highest intake of our sort of emerging talent or entry level career into HS2. Because as you know, engineering, if you're going to get into engineering, apprenticeship route is often the most common way, rather than a graduate opportunity. And what we found is that we do an assessment online, but that assessment is owned by another agency. We use an organization called Chemistry Group. They're a recruiter specializing online assessment tool. And the question they ask of those interested in applying for HS2, and they've not yet submitted any application, but they just expressed an interest. And then what comes up is a set of questions they have to answer. And it's really just to test their knowledge and competence and understanding of what they will be applying for. So at this stage, there's no way of us knowing who it is, their gender, or anything at all. So there's just a simple number allocated to that. What comes then back then allows us then to be in a position where Chemistry Group would then send an application for them to do online. They'll submit their application, and then the shortlist happens. And up to this stage, we still don't know who it is applying or anything. The first opportunity that anybody at HS2, in terms of the HR team or the hiring managers, know of them is on the day they get through the door to come for interview and assessment. And then early on that day, then are we in a position to set out a whole day of different exercises and tests and aptitude tests that would actually test for the role. So we're not looking at indicators of saying, oh, 5 years experience, you need to fit into this mold. We're looking specifically at the competency for the role and the job family. So we're looking at things, if we're looking at communication, we would do things to test around your communication skills. And it's not just verbal, but it's other forms of communication we look at. We look at sort of generic skill sets as well, because that's important. So things around project management. And regardless of whether you've worked in an infrastructure engineering sector or not, we would look at where those demonstration of those things are transferable. So people that have worked outside of the sector, have never worked with us before or for any infrastructure project, will be able to bring experiences outside of the sector to demonstrate that. So there are several things you need to do. You need to welcome the opportunity for transferable skills outside the sector. You need to be looking at the competencies, core competencies for that role, not a nice to have, but the actual core requirements. And also you need to have staff that are trained as part of the assessment. Hiring managers, HR, and your recruitment team needs to be trained around blind auditioning, around recruiting inclusively and unconscious bias, because unless they go through those training, they wouldn't really be able to implement it correctly.
So you try and make that whole process as objective as possible, right? With not knowing up to the point of interview who's coming and what they look like. And then during that interview, the selection process, which isn't even interviewing, right? You make it about demonstrating ability rather than an subjective measurement. And
Precisely.
someone is giving a great, Yvonne Gilfillan says, in the construction industry, it has traditionally been very closed. She tends to work with the supply chain and community organizations that support those individuals who wouldn't necessarily apply for work in the industry at all. For example, people with neurodiverse situations, and they mentor them, they support them, and they then give them the opportunity to demonstrate their brilliance. So she's, I think, describing something almost similar to you, where you're actually allowing someone to demonstrate what they're capable of. Is that right?
Precisely. Precisely. And I think, just to in agreement with that, you've got to see the best in people. And sometimes we're trying to get people to fit into what we want them to fit into. And if they don't quite tick the exact box, we'll rule them out. Now, we know that part of recruitment, the first stage is actually to deselect you from the process. Let's get rid of the people we don't want and then look at the people we do want. That's the whole purpose of recruitment. But ultimately, we find that blind auditioning, particularly where you're doing large volume recruitment, works really effectively. Typically, the sort of roles we've tested it on, even at professional level, beyond the apprenticeship that I mentioned, are things like project managers. And the project managers could be in the sort of technical area within engineering, or they could be in the corporate center. We've also looked at things around communications, or people who do with community engagement. We do with things that are people who are sort of analyst sort of role, or finance related sort of roles. So where you've got these sort of generic skill sets, it works effectively as a tool.
And then at the more senior levels, how does that work? Because then you don't have the big groups of people, you no longer have the generic skills. Would you still, how can you be objective in that selection process?
So you deploy something different. You won't necessarily be using blind audition. So at the senior level, what you have to do is look at senior leadership and take your senior leaders through the journey of why you need to recruit more inclusively. And one of the things you really need to do is to try not to allow that sort of boys network to exist, where at senior level, they will recommend somebody or talk to somebody to be appointed into a role. And so what you would do is, when the role becomes available, make sure that the headhunting agencies, like I mentioned, have already been briefed, and that you will not accept any shortlist unless it's diverse. And that's a central message, because you don't want to get in the way of headhunting agencies and how to do their job in finding people. You provide them the basis of how to find people, but they'll have to do their job in finding people. But the shortlist that they provide must be diverse. And the selection process, again, must be objective. You've got to have a diverse panel. It's not over coffee, it's not a one-to-one, but a diverse panel that can truly assess the capability.
Oh, that's a great example. Any more questions do come in now, because we only have 7 minutes left. Do also stay to the end, because we do have a raffle in the end where we give away a half-price ticket to our training programs. Meanwhile, we do have a question from Yvonne coming in. She asks, given that HS2 has a number of tier 1 contractors working on the project, How do you monitor the EDI commitments within daily operations of those contractors?
So a really good question. So we set requirements across the contract at the point of tendering, and those requirements are then brought to life during mobilization of the contract. So we explain the line of responsibility, who does what we expect them to do, the tools and the reporting mechanisms in place. Now, the EDI requirements and the activities they do to meet those requirements, we capture that through a report every 6 months. So every year, 6-month period, we ask them to demonstrate what they're doing around their inclusive recruitment, what they're doing around training, what they're doing to open up their supply chain to minority-owned businesses. We also look at how much money they spent with them and whether they're going to have an accreditation and how long it would take them to get an accreditation. So these are the host of activities we monitor and we capture. And what it means for our tier one is that we will have to engage with them through either forums, review meetings, contract review meetings, to understand what the challenges are or what progress they're making up to the point of those reporting period. Because there's nothing worse than to leave them for 6 months and get there and find that they're really struggling to do that. So engagement and collaboration throughout leading up to those reporting period is crucial. The most engaged tier one suppliers, the most engaged on diversity, do very well on diversity. The least engaged don't do as well. And there's a reason behind that, because they're more proactive. They know what needs to be done and they take steps to do it. We can support them more. And that's the other thing, because we don't expect all suppliers to have the answers at tier one. So we're there to provide the capacity and support to them as well.
Oh, I think that's a great way to end, Osita, because what you're saying there, and it's exactly what I'm seeing with my clients. If you really want to be diverse, you put in the effort, you engage with the topic, you get the results, right? And actually, we haven't mentioned this. Can you share some of the results you have been getting?
Yeah, so if you look across the sector, some of our indicators show that around gender representation, for example, and this is across infrastructure, but also engineering and rail. The best indicators around that is less than 20% for women, right? So if you look across, and however you split it, it's 20 to 21%. HS2 at the moment is at 36% representation of women across the organization. And that's really good from where we started. When we then start to look at things around diversity of ethnic groups, it's a bit more challenging. And we recognize across the sector, the best indicators are about 10% if you look at infrastructure. It doesn't get any better than that. But then when we start to challenge and say, right, actually, we need to look at what's happening with HS2, and we've driven forward with many, many changes around that area. So at the moment, we're at 21% in terms of ethnic minority representation. The one area that remains still the biggest challenge is around disability. And I think for several reasons. One is people are not comfortable in dealing with disability. And disability is one of the protected characteristics that can change within your lifespan. Either during employment, something may happen, you develop a disability. And across the sector, it's still about 3%. So there are indications that we're doing better in terms of representation. The other thing we're doing is around benchmarking clubs. We've started in the last 3 years to work across with our transport sector partners. So that's Transport for London, Network Rail, us, and Highways England, to look at supply diversity, but also how we pull together what we have as information we collect from similar suppliers to then develop the benchmark standard. And I'm glad to say that, something like that will be launched very soon, so that, people will be aware of it.
Oh, fabulous. So that gives a very quick overview of what it takes to recruit for inclusion, widen those channels, stop the old boys network, and find then a process to become as objective as you can in that selection process. Be really, really dedicated and engaged. It is a tough business issue to crack, one of the toughest, but when you keep on top of it, you can crack this. And I think HS2 really shows how to do that and driving it through the supply chain. So what have we got coming up for you next? You get a couple of emails if you're on this call, which one has the recording for you. So if you want to listen to any of this again, you can, or if you've missed part of it, it's all there. Also, if you have some questions on how to do this yourself, I offer a free half-hour session where you can just do a sense check with what you're doing. So you get an email, just book that in my diary. It's free, available, and I mean, I've worked with plenty of organizations on this, so hopefully I can help you on how to apply this in your place. Then 24th of June, we have another interview, this time with someone running a small engineering company who managed to increase his become much more diverse in his intake, for not really getting any CVs from anyone else than white men to getting a much wider range of CVs over a period of 3 years. So you can hear how you do this in small companies too. Then I'm going to bring up the feedback poll. Let me see where those are. And you can give us some feedback. Thanks for your lovely feedback in the chat already. And while you're giving your feedback, can I ask you, Osita, for a raffle to give us a number between 1 and 33, including 1 and, oh, not 1, because that's probably yourself, and 33.
Okay, let me see. 1 second, I've got the poll there. 15.
15. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to count on my screen, which obviously Osita can't see, and see who is my 15th participant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Well, we have a place at our Inclusive Recruitment Training Program for just half price for Christine Cecil. So Christine, if you want to claim that or give that to someone else, then let me know. Are you there? Do you want to? Congratulations. I didn't pick you. You were just number 15.
Random selection. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I'll get back to you on that.
Good, fabulous. Well, thank you all for being here, and I hope to hear from you soon or see you on the next call. Thank you.
Thank you
So much, Osita. That was a really, really good piece of information for absolutely everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you all. Bye-bye.